Okay, so what if I told you that one of the biggest ideas in, well, human history, the whole concept of the rule of law, was actually carved into a single massive piece of black stone almost 4,000 years ago? Wild, right? Well, today we're going to dig into the story of that exact stone, the Code of Hammurabi. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with how this thing was even found, because it's a great story. Then we'll get to know the man himself, Hammurabi. We'll dive into those famous eye for an eye laws and see if that's the whole story. We'll look at the society he built, his legacy, and then wrap up with the big question: why on earth does this still matter to us? Let's get into it.
All right, first up, the discovery. And our story doesn't actually start in ancient Babylon. Nope, it starts way more recently, in the winter of 1901. Picture this, a team of French archaeologists digging around in the dusty ruins of Susa, which is in modern-day Iran.
And then, bam, they find it. This absolutely massive pillar of polished black stone. We're talking 7.5 feet tall, just sitting there. Well, in 3 pieces. And it is covered top to bottom in this incredibly detailed script. Now, they knew it was something big for sure. But what they couldn't have known right then was that they had just stumbled upon the very roots of our entire modern legal system. All on this one piece of rock.
But wait a minute, here's where it gets weird. Susa is hundreds of miles from Babylon, which is where this thing was originally made. So what's it doing here? Well, it turns out this priceless piece of history was actually war booty. Yeah, it was stolen, like way back in the 12th century BCE. Some Elamite king raided Babylon, grabbed all the cool stuff he could find, including this giant stone, and hauled it back home.
I mean, check out this journey. It's pretty mind-boggling when you lay it all out. It gets made in Babylon, then it's stolen a few centuries later. Then it just sits, buried, for 3,000 years until it's dug up in 1901 and finally put back together in Paris. Think about that. This one single object has seen entire empires come and go.
So that begs the question, right? Who was the guy with enough power and vision to get something like this made in the first place? Well, let's talk about the man behind the steel, King Hammurabi.
Okay, so Hammurabi. He was the 6th king of what's called the First Babylonian dynasty, and get this, he was on the throne for 43 years. That's a long time. And when he started, Babylon was, just another city-state duking it out with its neighbors in Mesopotamia. But Hammurabi, yeah, he had much bigger ambitions.
See, this guy was so much more than just a lawgiver. He was a political genius, a total master strategist. Think of him like a grandmaster playing a game of chess. He'd team up with one king to take down another, and then, just when they thought they were buddies, he'd turn right around and conquer his former ally. It was ruthless, but it was brilliant. And one by one, he brought all of Mesopotamia under his control.
Okay, so now you've got this huge empire, but you can't hold it together with just an army, right? You need rules, you need order. And that brings us to the code itself, and probably the most famous and most misunderstood legal principle of all time.
Yep, there it is, Law 196. You've all heard it. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's called lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. And on the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward, maybe a little brutal. But here's the thing, the giant catch that most people miss. In Hammurabi's Babylon, that rule was not for everybody.
And why not? Well, it's because Babylonian society was super stratified. You had 3 basic classes. At the very top, you've got the Awilum. These are your nobles, the landowners, the elite. Then in the middle, you have the Mishkenim, kind of the common folk. And at the bottom, the Wardum, or slaves. And let me tell you, which of these boxes you fit into determined, well, pretty much everything about your life, especially when it came to the law.
Just look at this. It's pulled right from the code, and it's wild. So if a top-tier citizen, an Awilum, puts out the eye of another Awilum, poof, his own eye is put out. Eye for an eye, right? But if that same nobleman puts out the eye of a slave, he just pays a fine in silver. That's it. So much for blind justice, huh? It was all about your social status.
But okay, it's not all about brutal punishments that depend on your class. Tucked away in the code are some ideas that are, honestly, shockingly modern. I mean, they were clearly trying to build a stable society. For instance, you couldn't just accuse someone of a crime. If you made a false accusation, the penalty was severe. That's basically a presumption of innocence. They had laws setting a minimum wage for workers, and they had consumer protection. Get this, if a builder built a house and it fell down and killed the owner, the builder was executed. Talk about accountability.
This brings up a really interesting debate that scholars still have.
What was this thing for, exactly? Was it like a law book that judges would actually use in court? Or was it more like a giant piece of propaganda, a monument to show everyone what a great and just king Hammurabi was, chosen by the gods? Or maybe, was it a kind of textbook used to teach scribes and officials how the law worked? You know, the truth is probably a little bit of all three.
So, it's pretty clear the code wasn't just some dry list of thou shalt nots. No, it was a powerful tool. It was meant to shape and control this huge, sprawling empire that Hammurabi had put together. And because of that, it gives us this incredible window into what his society was really like.
And here's that social pyramid again. It really drives the point home. You've got this tiny group of elites holding all the power at the top, a bigger group of regular folks in the middle, and then the largest group by far, the slaves, at the bottom with basically zero rights. It was, from the ground up, a profoundly unequal system.
And Hammurabi's big unification project wasn't just about conquering land. It was also about religion. In a really clever move, he took Babylon's own local god, a guy named Marduk, and basically promoted him. He made Marduk the king of all the gods in Mesopotamia. See the parallel? Just like Hammurabi was the king of all the people. The message couldn't be clearer. One empire, one king, one supreme god.
But for all of his brilliant planning, there was a major flaw in this grand design. The empire that Hammurabi built, for all its power, was actually incredibly fragile. And its legacy, well, it's a lot more complicated than just one big stone pillar.
In fact, historians have a word for Hammurabi's empire, ephemeral, which is just a fancy way of saying it didn't last very long. And the reason is, it was built entirely around him, his personality, his military smarts, his administrative skill. So the moment he was gone, the whole thing started to fall apart. His own son faced huge revolts almost immediately after taking the throne.
And this timeline really shows you how fast it all went downhill. About 150 years after Hammurabi dies, a Hittite army just rolls in, sacks Babylon, and that's the end of his dynasty. Gone. After that, another group called the Kassites come in and rule for hundreds of years. It's a good reminder that the story of Babylon isn't about one single people. It's about this one place being ruled by lots of different groups over time.
Which brings us all the way back to where we started. Back to that stone pillar sitting in the Louvre Museum today. After all this history, all this complexity, why should we care? Why does this nearly 4,000-year-old rock still matter?
Because it's a total game changer for human civilization. Now, it wasn't the first ever set of laws, but it's one of the oldest and most complete we've ever found. And the idea at its heart that justice shouldn't just be whatever a king feels like on a given day, but that it should be based on laws that are written down for everyone to see, that is absolutely revolutionary. It is the dawn of the rule of law.
And Hammurabi says so himself, right there on the stone. In the final section, he basically says that any person who feels they've been wronged can come and stand before his statue, read the inscription, and find justice. The promise, at least, was that the king's justice was for everyone.
Of course, as we've seen, the reality was a little different, wasn't it? Justice in Babylon depended a lot on who you were and where you stood on that social pyramid. And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. Here we are almost 4,000 years later. Have we actually achieved that ideal? Is justice in our world today truly the same for everyone? Something to think about.
History isn't dust, it's a journey through time. Here on History LM, we tell it simply and fast. If you love discovering the past in just a few minutes, hit like and follow History LM. Your next journey through time is waiting.